global impetus to tackle poverty and deprivation was launched in 2000 within the framework of the Millennium Development Goals. This provided a strong motivation to intensify the ongoing national development efforts. The UN Millennium Campaign, in collaboration with the government of Ghana and other partners, are holding the Pan-African Conference on tackling inequalities in the context of structural transformation. The high-level multi-stakeholder conference aims at forging linkages between the ongoing African developmental debates and the discussions on the post-MDGs development framework. Professor Henrietta Mensah-Bonsu, the chairperson at the opening of the 3-day Pan-African Conference on Inequalities, in her response said,
Africa is changing, and with the change, the possibility that some may get left behind. Inequalities don't resolve themselves, but they can be resolved if people who have positions of responsibility at all levels are well-meaning enough to factor in those interests. The politicians and policymakers can concern themselves with certain direction, but it takes the operatives to actualize some of the things they see.
According to the chairman of the National Development Planning Commission, Mr. P.V. Obeng, Ghana has a record of fighting inequality.
We as Ghana, championing the cause of inequalities for the world, were employed upon by the community that met in Copenhagen to take the discussion home to our mother continent, to share the perspectives, and to see how we can sensitize the continent and its countries to take upon this challenge as perhaps the most crucial missing link in all the exercises that we've been taking on board ourselves as we try to serve our people with development.
There were also goodwill messages from the partners of the government in organizing the conference.
This conference is a significant step in placing the challenges of inequality at the core of the African agenda for the Africa you want. Equally, your deliberations of this conference are important for our joint work of defining an ambitious post-2015 agenda for poverty eradication and sustainable development.
Confronting inequality in developing countries underscores the imperative of this conference. The report found that income inequality in Africa is extremely high. The continent is the second most unequal in the world after Latin America and the Caribbean. According to the UNDP report, on average, income inequality increased 11% in developing countries between 1990 and 2010. And as a result, a significant majority of households in developing countries, more than 75% of the population, are living today in societies where income is more unequally distributed than it was in the 1990s.
In Africa's last 2 decades of fast and consistent economic growth, the continent has not yet succeeded in translating economic gains into commensurate social development outcomes. Far too many of our economies are dependent on the production and export of primary commodities, and far too many are highly unequal. Slow progress in addressing poverty and inequality and the very nature of economic growth on the continent have created a vicious circle whereby inequality and slowdown in economic growth are mutually reinforcing.
This conference is of the utmost importance because we know that it answers the call from ordinary citizens for action to tackle inequalities in all forms. As part of the discussions around the new development agenda, beyond 2015, we've heard from citizens of what matters to them in their everyday lives. The My World survey has heard from 2 million people across the world who've told us that it is education, health, an honest and responsive government, and jobs that are their priority in their everyday lives for them and their family. But here in Africa, when we heard from them, we delved a little deeper. And what we heard was inequalities from every single respondent. They said inequalities was the issue to be tackled. Income inequality was seen as fundamental, but not the only issue. Inequality in services, across gender and geographically. When we also went deep into communities where those who are most affected, the poorest of the poor, with the Participate research, inequalities ran across every single response. So we know it is citizens that are calling for action.
At this juncture in world history, the issue of inequalities is probably one of the most critical ones to address, given its links to human and social development, economic growth, and building a peaceful, sustainable future for Africa and for humanity. I share with you herewith a quote from the UN Millennium Declaration, which said, "We have a collective responsibility to uphold the principles of human dignity, equality, and equity at the global level. As leaders, we have a duty, therefore, to all of the world's people, especially the most vulnerable, and in particular the children of the world, to whom the future belongs." As we speak of inequalities, it is always helpful to put a human face on the issue. How do inequalities actually manifest in terms of human lives?
Now, I hope, and I believe that many of you also hope, that we will have strong political engagement and leverage in tackling inequalities in the future. And I'd really like to thank Your Excellency for hosting this conference. Thank you very much, Ghana, for allowing us to speak on inequalities in this very important subject today in these 3 days ahead. I'm going to plead with Your Excellency to invite us back to repeat this and do it maybe not every year, but every so often, to keep us on our toes, to make sure that we're having progress in this development, and that we, independent of which part of society that we are representing, that we're actually doing something, that we're not ending with just talking, and that we ensure that we forge partnerships.
In his official opening address, His Excellency John Dramani Mahama said, "There is a gap between the haves and the have-nots."
Africa is rising. Since 2005, poverty on the African continent has declined faster than it did between 1990 and 2005. African economies are the second fastest growing in the world. This growth will not be sustainable unless we properly address the issue of wealth inequality in our societies and ensure that this growth we're experiencing is an inclusive one. What we now realize is that we cannot follow the same development paradigm of nations in the so-called developed world. We cannot use the same indexes to either influence or measure the growth of our societies. We cannot emulate the cultures of capitalism and consumption without somehow finding a way to infuse our individual indigenous value systems into this. In moving forward, we in Africa have to ask ourselves, what kind of societies do we want to create?